Welcome back to the Men of Iron podcast. We're on the home stretch and actually rounding third as we're getting here to be the dad your family needs. I think it's so cool about this and just having a community. And at Men of Iron, we do actually have a couple different things to get connected in. I think super cool is our digital that we're doing, kind of new. I'm actually leading it. So if you want to see more of me, you can definitely get connected. We're going across the country with a couple of our different resources, which I'm super excited about. But also we have in-person groups that we're running as well. So it'd be great to have you join one of those and just get connected into a community where, dads, single guys are all getting together, and just talking about real life stuff. So it's super cool. But I definitely want to dive into this topic because I'm going to be picking Ryan's brain the whole way through this. Be the dad your family needs to be. Family needs. And I think it's so cool because dad, I think of I'm going to be called that soon. You know what I mean? From that lens of my son's going to be like, hey, dad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what that actually looks like for you. You have a couple kids now and you have another one coming on the way. So it's just kind of hear your thought on what that means to be the dad your family needs.
I think it's interesting. When we try to do a podcast and we're trying to do a whole month of podcasts on fatherhood, the best thing we can possibly do is give you some basic pointers.
Yeah.
So the thing we've been trying to leave you with as an audience is God is the ultimate example. Try to be who God is. He loves us. He provides for us. He gives us the things we need. He disciplines us to pull us back into relationship. That's what we're striving to be as fathers. But I don't know your family. However many people are watching this thing, I don't know your kids. I don't know your family. I don't know your dynamic. And sometimes we can get into unintentional hot water when it's hey, I'm not actually speaking broad stretch into your family. I don't know your kids. So the best we can do is give you kind of pointers and tips and sort of what the Bible says, how God has instructed us. But when I think about how to be the dad your family needs, you have to know what your family needs. And you can't do that outside of relationship. And so you have to pursue relationship. We talked last week about pursuing relationship with your wife. You have to pursue relationship with your kids. It can be exhausting. Yeah. But the reality is being a dad is a lot of work. And sometimes you're going to get it right. And sometimes you're not. But you have to actually know what your family needs to be the dad your family needs. And one of the things that has encouraged me, it's sort of this odd little verse tucked into First Chronicles. There's this scene in First Chronicles where David is officially becoming the king of Israel. It's a legit thing. It's finally happening. If you know anything about David, it was quite a journey to get there. And it's this boring chapter, honestly, chapter 12, that just lists off the people that were joining up in King David's army. And buried in that chapter, verse 32, it says, the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. The heads of them were 200. And it goes on. I hope that you can be a man who knows the times and knows what God has called you to do. You will not be able to do that outside of relationship with God. Seriously, hear me on this. You will not be able to know what your family needs if you are not connected to God. It will be very confusing. It will be very frustrating. It actually will still be some of those things when you are connected with God. But the best thing you can do to be the man that your family needs is be a man who pursues relationship with God and then pursues relationship with his wife, and then pursues relationship with his kids. And so you got to know them. You got to know kind of what they need, what they resonate with, and you got to know the times, and you got to understand what to do.
Is there things that you think, I was just thinking about this thought, that you could replace, that replace those relationships that are so crucial? You as a dad, are changing out to be oh, I'm going to have a relationship maybe more so with my career or something like that we can kind of get mixed in there and it messes up kind of being a dad that, the family needs.
It's interesting. My wife and I joke about how we've lived so many different versions of our own lives. We've been married for about 10 years. Actually, by the time this comes out, we'll be married for 10 years. And we've lived so many different versions of life. And some of the worst, honestly, if in every aspect, it was when both of us were defined by our jobs.
Wow. And
our jobs kind of called the shots in our lives, and we were worse spouses and worse parents. One of the craziest things about, you're talking about replacements.
Yeah. One
of the craziest things that has dawned on me recently about jobs is that, I'm pretty new at Man of Iron, for example. I think I've been here for about a year by the time this episode rolls out. my previous job actually replaced me pretty quick.
Wow.
And a lot of times we trick ourselves into thinking like, oh, when I leave there, they'll never be able to make it. You know, like it feels kind of good to think that. The reality is they make it.
Yep.
And a lot of people are not sitting around being like, where did he go? What, you know, even if you had strong relationships, I had really strong relationships at my last position, and you know, they move on. If you disappear from your family, they most likely will not be able to move on.
Wow.
Like your family will always be your family. And again, we've tried to recognize this across the series. Some of you have good families, some of you do not have, some of you have great relationships, some of you have struggled. Your family needs you to be present. And it is so easy for men to put their careers in a place where really their families and their faith should be. I'm not saying, I'm not saying don't do your job.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't bring your best to your job. God actually asks us to honor him by doing that. But part of knowing the times and knowing your family is spending time with them, getting to know them, being present with them. And I do recognize that some of us have very demanding jobs. Some of our jobs ask us to leave for pretty long periods of time. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But also, I'm not going to go as far as to say like it's never a bad thing. Sometimes it's actually a really bad decision. And I have gone through times in my life where I was like, man, I'm working in ministry. Like I haven't seen my kids for 4 days, but that's okay. I'll be around. And then I'm exhausted. I'm not present. And personally, it was a terrible decision for my life. And so don't put things in the wrong order, and make sure you prioritize the right relationships.
Man, I love that. I think even for myself, I'm just thinking that through of like, I let my job become my identity. And my identity is no longer being that dad. It's being, I'm this guy that's working all the time and bringing home the bacon or however, want to put it. And it's like, I'm striving to do all this, but at the end of the day, my family is literally dying and perishing in front of me because I'm not spending that relationship with them. And I think that's so crucial is like, as we say, like, jobs are important. Like, let's not cut around that. But I think also too, like we need to spend the time, like you said, like family is and family time, I think it's like a cliche to say that, but it's important.
Yeah. It's been a huge decision for my wife and I in the last year and a half to prioritize family. And there have been several times where we're like, this is risky. Like this is a crazy decision to try to do this. And actually God has proven to be faithful to his promises. Like he promised to take care of us. He 100% has. And in a lot of ways, we're in a much better position than we ever have been because both of us have chosen to pursue significant relationship with our family. And one of the coolest things, like we've talked about, like I have 4 kids right now, we're getting to know every single one of them so much better because we're actually spending time with them. And it's weird how it's like a shocking revelation to us because it should actually be common sense, but it hasn't been. It hasn't been.
Man, that's so good. And I just think like we were talking about this the other day when we were doing our little pre-meeting before getting ready for the podcast. And I was just thinking of that, like, spending that quality time, you know what I mean? And I think like, we don't want to make it like something crazy or it's like this mystical thing, but making sure you're intentional. Yeah. And I think that's with anything in our life, even while in following God, like we take intentional time to spend with God. We need to take the same intentional time we spend with our wife, intentional time we need to spend with our kids. Yeah. Like we need to make sure that's an intentional thing.
It's funny, man. Sometimes we talked in our pre-meeting about quality of time over quantity of time.
Yes.
Sometimes you got to be really careful about that because there have been times in my own life where I was like, well, I'm not spending any time with my family, but when I am, it's really quality time. And honestly, like in my own life, it was like, dude, like you spent about a good hour with your family this whole week. Like, I don't know. Like sometimes we're really good at convincing ourselves things that aren't true. And sometimes quality time, I'm not saying quality time is a bad thing, but sometimes quality time is like a Band-Aid over a real problem. Because it's like, yeah, I'm never home, but when I am, it's good. It's like, be careful. Be really, really careful. Because again, it's hard to know the times and what you should do when you're not around.
Yeah, I think it's just so good, like, as I'm thinking of it, about to be a father.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just that thought, be the dad your family needs, like, as I start to, from my mentor and just talking to the guys here, just understanding that who have kids and talking to you really is just like, be the dad the family needs and what that's going to take to do so.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not just like just showing up.
Yep.
It's actually being intentional in those relationships with our kids, with our wives, with God. And can I just reflect what God is as my ultimate example?
To even add to that, like recognize the weight Okay. Sometimes I'm cautious about that, but recognize the weight of the fact that God is asking you to be the spiritual leader in your family.
So good.
So it's one thing to be a cool dad. It's one thing to be a fun dad. It's like, those are all fantastic. I love it. Be the spiritual leader of your family. And sometimes you actually end up doing things that are like a little bit weird, a little bit different. And that's some of the things Jenny and I have noticed over the past year and a half. Like, we've made some intentional decisions that actually put us in a camp that's much, much smaller. And it's helped us to be really present. It's helped us to know our kids. And God has actually asked us to disciple our children. You actually referenced in an earlier episode that Deuteronomy 6 passage. Yeah. Like, as dads, we've been asked to make sure that our kids know who God is, what he's commanded. And in that Deuteronomy passage, it's like, essentially the feeling of it is like, every time you have a chance to teach them about who God is and what he's done, make sure you do that and make sure you capitalize on that opportunity. And sometimes you end up, praying with your kids. Yeah. Not everybody does that. You end up praying with your wife. Not everybody does that. You end up leading little devotionals over dinner time. Not everybody does that. At first, they might feel like strange things, but you want to be a dad who's present, and you want to be a dad who spiritually leads, because the best thing that we can strive to do is be like God.
Man, I just thinking that you kind of alluded to a couple praying with your kids, maybe doing a devotional. Like, what are some simple things that, like, as a new dad coming up, that I can apply like easy out of the gate to help me out to be like, how do I bring that up so it can be consistent, As
a new dad, the best thing you're going to be able to do is find some rest when you can.
Come on,
because
that's what I'm hearing.
Your little newborn is not going to be like, "Dear Father, tell me about what 1 John says." Love your wife. Through some trying times, like when you're not sleeping, you get on each other's nerves a little bit more. Yeah. And so be gracious, be loving, be present. There's times where you're going to need to show up and help with some things that maybe you wouldn't normally prioritize. And then start to think about it. Because a baby, like the basics of a baby is change them when they need it, feed them when they need it, provide a good household for that baby. But start to think about the things you're going to do with your time in the future. Because like one of the things I've heard about is like healthy spiritual rhythms. So like, when are there going to be times when your family is gathered together? A lot of people do that like over dinner time, or like sometimes actually you're going to be like in the car headed somewhere. Like, take advantage of those times when you're gathered, because it's a good time to pursue relationship with each other, and it's a good time to teach a little bit of something. And start teaching your kids what God has taught us, like as early as you can. Again, newborn baby flies right over their head, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like they don't know about that stuff. But as you start to be able to like read them some stories, like, you could read them cool stories about silly hippos and funny geese. But you could also tell them about like Moses. You could tell them about Joshua. You could tell them about, what Jesus did with the disciples. Those stories are good, and it's good for them to be set up to understand them. And the earlier you start, I think, at first they're not going to understand it all, but you're setting like a good solid foundation.
Yeah. And I think it's so good. Like, I'm just thinking back to my childhood and what my dad was to me. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like that example, as well as just being there to love me and care for me, but also to teach me. Yeah. Like I remember just like even learning the simple stuff. Like, I grew up going outdoors all the time and teaching me how to hunt and fish and all those things. And like, yes, we want to focus on the spiritual side of it and teaching them about God, but also it's like, teach them how to, tie up a fly, teach them how to shoot it, whatever it may be, shoot a gun, whatever it may be, go hunting. I think it's just so cool. Like, with that title, be the dad your family needs. It's like, it can be multifaceted. Yeah. And that's a sense of teaching, even like how to teach them how to tie a shoe. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? The simple things that like we take for granted, but it could be so fun.
Dude, I'll tell you what, one of the things that's happening in my own life right now is my 8-year-old son. He's my oldest. He has recently decided that he is a fisherman. And the unfortunate thing is he is an early morning fisherman. So he's very good at waking up on time at like way too early in the morning. And one of the things that I've had to do to be the dad I need to be right now is just like stir that excitement a little bit. Yeah. So when he dude, you'll experience this. When he wakes me up at the side of my bed, is like, "Dad," and his face is like right here, and you're like, "Ah!" I got to get out of bed. Honestly, it's the last thing I want to do. I just did it this past Saturday. Get out of bed, load up the canoe, head to the lake. We're on the lake 5:30 in the morning. This kid is loving life. And it's a great opportunity for me to invest in my relationship with him. Now, the problem is I have 2 other boys that also think that they are professional fishermen. So now, like, it's a little bit of a precedent where I think I won't get to sleep in any weekend ever again. Yeah. But show up. Show up, man. Show up.
Yeah. I think it's just so cool to be able to be a part of like all those experiences at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Whether it's being, he thinks he's a pro fisherman, whether it's learning to tie a shoe, or even just getting like, I think like even exciting, like to hear my baby say dad.
Oh, dude.
You know what I mean? Like I'll probably lose it and cry all over the place.
You might want to make sure they learn to say mom first.
Yeah, that's good.
That could be good for your life.
Second
just
choice.
long term. Yeah. But
love that.
Yeah.
That's so good. Well, hey, we're coming to a close here. We're wrapping up this whole series. Any closing thoughts you have as we're bringing it home on this whole fatherhood and this long month of July here?
We've been promising that the thread was going to be like, strive to be the father that God is. And that's the thing. Like, if there's anything I want to leave you with, it is strive to be the father that God is. Yeah. And so, like, learn what he does, learn who he is, pursue relationship with him, and try to be like him. Like, sometimes it's like, well, I'm never going to be perfect. Like, yeah, I get it. You're never going to be perfect, but continue to improve, continue to build your relationship with God, continue to strengthen that legacy, because God is the ultimate father. He gives us the best example. We do everything we can to be like him so that we are the dad that our family needs.
Man, I love that. And that's just really for myself as I'm thinking it through and just being able to have the opportunity to be a part of this series of being a dad. It's coming right around the corner for me.
Yeah.
And just looking forward to taking all these tidbits of, that we went through of fatherhood and leaving your proper legacy. And like at the end of the day, if I can just reflect what God has done for me and how much he loves me to my wife and to my family, and that is what my legacy is that I fought that good fight. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Man, that's all I want at the end of the day. Well, thanks again, guys. We really appreciate you hanging with us through the Fatherhood series here. When we come back around, guess what? I have a son. That's kind of crazy to say that, but just thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you guys next month.
Thanks for listening to the Men of Iron podcast. If you enjoyed that episode, you can go to our website, menofiron.org. You can also like that episode. You can ring the notification bell, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. But again, thanks for listening to the Men of Iron podcast.